my favorite stunt was doing the 6-story high fall, and I did it into a layer of boxes. If you go back to the beginning of stunts, early film stunts, they weren't falling into boxes. All of these things work, but they have their drawbacks and their limitations. So they would do this, and then somebody would get hurt.
Tyler Foley, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here.
We have all kinds of interesting folks that come on the show. Your backstory stands out to me, a former stuntman. Let's start there. What was that like?
So to clarify, because it's the easiest thing to say is stuntman, I was a performer who did stunts as opposed to a stunt performer. And it's such a weird distinction, but I have friends who are in the industry who are been in the union, have been getting pushed around and beat up on film for dozens of years. I was a child actor starting at 6. And then when I got into my late teens and early 20s in Vancouver, I got to the privilege of working with some really incredible stunt professionals and getting to do some of my own stunts and getting to work with the stunt teams who did some really, really amazing things. And I got to do some, as you and I had discussed, some high falls and some ratchet pulls and some really cool stuff. So it was an amazing thing to do at a very pivotal time in my life, to get to just explore a career that most people have never even heard of or don't think about.
Yeah, not at all. I mean, that world is kind of a mystery, and that's part of the magic, I think.
Yeah.
Did that have any influence on where you ended up today in safety?
1,000%. It's ironic because I've had so many careers. It's often funny for me because when you start your first job at 6 years old, you get to retire from that job after 20 years and still only be 26. So I've, been a performer and a stunt professional. I have an engineering background and now safety. And all of them have a common thread or a common theme. But everything that I first learned about safety came directly from the work that I did in stunts. My initial understanding of things like engineering controls and substitution, administrative controls, even down to PPE. Like as a stunt professional, when I would be doing small falls, if somebody's going to punch you and you kind of do one of the fallbacks, right? Engineering control in that they're going to push you over. You have to do a big fall. We're going to put styrofoam cups, like just your regular Dixie cup, and you put those on the side of a 4x6 sheet of plywood, and then boom, it creates an air cushion. It's an engineer control so that your body absorbs the impact. It's a shock absorber, but it can still hurt hitting a board from 2 to 3 feet, even with controlled deceleration. So you put on an armadillo pad like you would for dirt biking. That's your PPE. A lot of times you're going to, if you don't have that board to crush and you're just doing a straight fall onto the floor, a lot of times you slap your arm to take the impact. And so you flatten out and you smack your arm down and it spreads out, very similar to like if you were like a snowshoe effect, right? You want to walk above the snow, get a snowshoe, it spreads it out. You slap your arm, it spreads out the impact, but it still hurts. So as weird as it is, you take feminine hygiene products, usually the heavy flow ones, they're sticky and they're padded, and you put it on your elbow and then you don't see a big elbow pad underneath wardrobe, and then you put on a heavier shirt and boom, you fall down, and then you keep yourself padded. So things like PPE, those administrative controls, the first safety talk or like toolbox talk that I ever did was prior to doing stunts. You get the whole crew lined up together and say, this is what's going to happen today. This is the work that we're about to do. This is the task we're about to undertake. These are the risks with it. This is what we have in place. These are the people who will be responding if anything goes wrong. That whole breakdown was just standard practice doing a stunt, because it's really bad when a stunt guy gets hurt. The whole point is to make something that looks dangerous safe. And to this day, I've worked in dozens of industries, from aviation to oil and gas to construction. Jumping out of a 6-story window is still the safest job that I've ever had, ever.
I love that. And it makes so much sense. Really fundamentally, you're going through and you're breaking down every part of what you're doing in a way that, you know, so that everyone on the set is on the same page and going through. So there's a lot of similarities you have to find between all those things. Eh?
Well, and it's like any other vocation or profession. You're there to do a job. There are always risks inherent with any job that you do. It's just some jobs inherently have more risks to them. And one of the things that I learned from my time in stunts, and you got to remember, I was doing this late 90s, early 2000s. So this we're talking now 25, 30 years ago when I was jumping out of windows. The attitude then in safety was, there is no way that we can take out all of the risk with this. Cannot be done. There is going to be risk associated with this, but what we can do is do our best so that if we fail successfully. And I think that's the biggest problem that I ran into as a safety professional when I started doing safety in places like oil and gas or construction, and they all had mission zero incident. Like, how can you, it's impossible to have no incidents. Especially if you're classifying a near miss as an incident, which they are, that you can't take that away. And so what I found interesting was I've always been of the opinion that you can't take out the human factor. Humans are inherently flawed. To err is human, as Shakespeare said. So if we know that humans are flawed, humans will make mistakes, humans are fallible, you know that because you can't take that part out, all we can do is plan for the failure. And if we plan to fail safely, if we plan to fail with minimal consequence, that's easier to plan for. And that's all stunts is, planning to fail with minimal consequence.
Right. I love that. And it makes a ton of sense. Mm-hmm. Your organization, Total Buy-In HSE Consulting, you work with companies all the time in all kinds of industries. So you have this perspective where you've seen what works in a safety culture, what doesn't. What are some of those key indicators of a high quality safety culture, or one that's working well versus one that might not be so effective?
Again, back to what I learned from film. An effective safety culture is one that doesn't call itself a safety culture. It's the culture. I didn't go to the stunt toolbox talk. We had the safety briefing for the cast and crew. Didn't matter who you were. If you were on that film set that day and this thing was happening, everybody from hair and makeup and wardrobe to catering to the actual on-camera talent to the behind-the-camera crew, everybody knew what was going on. It wasn't siloed and isolated. And I think that really good cultures recognize that culture is a homogenous thing. It is what everybody's doing. There isn't HR and safety and finance and sales, because all of them, I'm doing an audit right now where the entire sales team is like, oh, there's no risk in my job. How much do you travel in a week? Usually 3,000 to 6,000 kilometers. You're putting 3,000 to 6,000 kilometers on your personal vehicle in a week, and there is no risk in your job. Are you going to client sites you're familiar with? Oh no, it's sales calls. So we're usually going to XYZ place and going into these industrial kitchens and these freezers and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, and yet no risk. Tell me more about this. Because they have been siloed. And ironically, that company, if you were to ask their staff, what is the safety culture like? All of them, to a T. in one of the safest places I've ever worked at. The CFO and the CEO and the president, they all talk about safety. They're on site regularly. There is a culture of safety. But is it a good culture? Because I would argue that if your sales staff and your admin staff and all of these separated, siloed divisions don't understand safety, but the warehouse staff really do, then you don't have a good safety culture. You have a feeling of a good safety culture. And that's where I think it's the ones that really get it right. It's integrated top down and down up. Like I'm always amazed when we talk about org charts and organizational structure, and is it a top down or is it a top down led or is it a bottom up led, and who's the leadership? Leaders are not the people who have the title of leadership. Right? There is leadership on the ground floor just as much as there's leadership in the C-suite. It's identifying the people who have the voice that have impact and then figuring out what it is that they're saying. And if all of those voices throughout the organization are aligned, you have a good culture. And if all of those are aligned and preaching safety, you have a good safety culture.
Okay, so it makes sense. You have to make sure that there is a level of communication between all levels. And it also, your company's name, Total Buy-In, that means everybody's actually bought into.
Everybody's bought in and everybody's empowered. So it's okay. And the other thing is too, it's okay to not be a leader. It's okay to just simply follow. You need the yin and the yang, right? I can't lead if I don't have a flock. Right? How do you shepherd the sheep if there are no sheep? Right? And it's okay. And I think we've, particularly in North America, we have a very independent and cavalier attitude that has come with being a young country, founded by explorers and people who are looking to push boundaries and find freedoms, and all of this language that turns around to very maverick thinking. And that's great. Still need people who are just comfortable to be guided and finding within those pockets who the voices of influence are. And being able to make sure that not only are we identifying those voices, but we are amplifying those voices if they're saying the message that we want, or intercepting that if they're saying the message that we're not. Because they have influence one way or the other. And if they're not on board with our messaging, how do we get them on ours? And that starts to become that higher leadership. How does this leader influence this leader to influence this leader to influence this leader? Because leadership doesn't necessarily carry a title, but they still carry the influence.
Yeah, it's true. There's so much that comes from the top. I think that, and in leadership, I think oftentimes something that you'll learn is that you have to be really careful with what you say, because you could say something and you might not even mean it, or you might, and then people will take that as go and execute, and we got to get this done, and this is the culture now. When a newer safety professional is looking at an organization, right? Maybe they just joined and they're trying to identify those points of influence, right? You talk about people that maybe they won't listen to the safety guy, but they'll listen to Joe, who's been there for 15 years, right? Yeah. How do they identify those people and start working with them to make it a sort of a positive environment?
Well, it's interesting. There's a couple of studies. I love game theory, and I love looking at the nodal impact. And there's a couple of studies. Again, being in film, I love 6 degrees of separation because I am 2 degrees separated from Kevin Bacon. But there's actually what started that 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon was a study that looked at interrelational connection throughout the world. And part of it was viral spread. They wanted to, they were looking. There are a couple of different scientific bodies that were looking at it at the same problem, but for a different solution. And the idea of nodal spread, where you now know me. I now know you. Will have common influence, but we will also have occasionally an uncommon pair. And it's these branch nodes that create that 6 degrees of separation. Because theoretically, if you and I only know 100 people, but geographically we're not going anywhere, compounded out over 6 generations, it's still not that many people. It's large, but it's not significant. It's certainly not the billions of people within the world. But as soon as you have a node that breaks off in branches, I have a friend in Dubai. I have another friend who lives in Hong Kong. My wife laughs at me because there isn't anywhere in the world that we want to go that I don't know somebody whose couch we can crash on. And it always blows her mind. She's like, how do you know these people? I'm like, well, I don't know. I went to school with this one. And then, I did a show with this one. And I've, you start to make those connections, and then they go somewhere or they move, and you have these one-offs. And it's that nodal connection that then when you do the study bunches people together. So you have that common sphere of influence, and then these people come around, then you get a hop. These ones are always, always obvious, because like anything else in the world, it's where we're grouping, right? I think, it's a line from a song, Soul Asylum on the Grave Dancers Union, album. It's, nothing attracts a crowd like a crowd. As soon as you have that one person, there's going to be 2 or 3, and then 5 or 6. So honestly, as a young safety professional, if I'm trying to figure out who has influence, I figure out who do the people go to when you tell them to do a thing and they don't agree. Right?
Right.
It's kind of like when I was a kid, right? If you don't agree with mom, you go talk to dad. Dad will say, or vice versa. Dad says no, mom. Who wields the influence in that moment? So if I'm telling you no, and you don't go anywhere, you're probably the influencer. If I tell you no and you go, I go talk to Mark, right?
Okay. Right. So you've kind of got to observe a little bit.
It's definitely observation.
Step back, and then once you identify them, I guess you start reaching out, start connecting with them, and start making those.
Who's talking to who in the lunchroom? Right?
Right.
That's where people are the most human. If you're working on, in a camp job, who's hanging around in the cafeteria? Who's hanging around in the social things? Like who goes to the bar at night? Who goes to the gym? Who's working out together? Who's following who? Whose schedule determines when people go to whatever, right? Because if we're all going to the lunchroom because you're going, well, you're the influencer, right? We all know that we don't show up until. And it takes some observation, but that really, that's a good safety professional. If you don't have the powers of observation, you're not going to make it in this career, period.
Right.
You need to be observant. You need to have a little bit of intuitive nature to you, inquisitive nature to you. Really good safety professionals have that empathy and that understanding, and they can see where those ripples are. But it's those social interactions. Who's having a smoke break together, and who leads the smoke break? Who can bum a cigarette off of anybody and they will give it to him instantly? Like, it's weird little things like that. But those tend to be the influence. Who can't get a cigarette in the smoke pit?
That's a tough one. Right? Yeah, it's tough to be that guy.
If people aren't sharing their smokes with them, that's somebody who doesn't have influence.
Yeah, but it's true though. What you're saying makes a lot of sense. Probably takes some time to sort of slow down and really get in that mindset where you're going to say, okay, all right, well, who's going to who's communicating with who, but over a long period of time, I bet the payoffs are huge once you kind of build that network and figure out what levers to pull to really get the messages across.
Well, and part of it is it's one thing to identify a person. It's another thing to be able to communicate with that person. And not everybody communicates the same way. Not everybody wants to buy into the message. There's 3 types of people. There's the people who share your message. Well, I guess 4. They share your message and are willing to promote it. There's the people who share your message but won't talk about it. There's the people who don't share your message and will very much talk about it. And there's the people who don't share your message but could be changed. This third one, there's not a lot you can do about, right? If you can't change their mind, but they're actively going to sabotage what your messaging is, who you are, what the culture needs to be, those are cancers. And I've heard this talk a few different ways, a few different times, but when you have a cancer within your culture, it's no different than a cancer in your body. And I'm always amazed at the cultures who won't cut out the cancer. If I was to tell you right now that you have a tumor on your liver, you're going to tell me to cut it out and then treat it and minimize it so that it doesn't spread. And yet so many organizations will know who that person is. We all know who the person is. And yet they won't do a single thing about it. Oh, well, we can't. They've been here for 20 years. Okay. Have we tried changing their attitude? Oh, yeah, but they just won't change. Okay, well, that's a cancer on your culture. And as long as that's there, it will never be healthy.
Right.
So sometimes it's making those tough calls. Sometimes you have somebody who has influence. It's a negative influence, but it's just because of their lack of understanding. There is abilities to educate them, to treat that and have it become uncancerous. Or cancer is probably not necessarily the right one. A meme, right? Like a meme is going to spread no matter what. And is the messaging the message that you want, or is it the message that you don't? And can you change that messaging within a group, within a societal group?
And meme and game theory means something a little bit different, I think, than
mimetics. Yeah, but it's where they've pulled it from. So
right.
Even if you just think of a viral meme,
right?
It although technically different, it means the same thing. It has the ability to spread quickly.
Right.
And any time that you have an ability to spread quickly, you want to make sure that you're using that to your advantage as opposed to your disadvantage.
It's a timely message. There's a lot of different generations that are working together in the same, same industries. You've sometimes got 3-4 generations working together. And a lot of times, this is not always the case, but older generations might have kind of stuck in ways, very skilled, highly experienced. They might be even the most productive workers, but they might also be the cowboys of the crew. And, you've got younger workers on site that are looking up to them and seeing what they're doing, and they might be, learning after them. So it's important that you be able to really draw the line. How would you recommend, I guess, safety professionals get the courage, and obviously this takes time, it's not easy, but to speak up and talk to these individuals and really draw that line in the sand?
So the only way to get good at that is to just do it. You're going to have 100 uncomfortable conversations before they ever become comfortable. And even once they become comfortable, you will still have uncomfortable conversations. I can think of at least a dozen uncomfortable conversations that I've had to have this year. And I've been in safety for 15 years now, and public speaking for 40. So being able to present a message has never been a difficult thing for me to do. And yet sometimes the messaging that I have to deliver is still difficult, or have those conversations, or push back against authority, having the self-awareness to know when you could be wrong and admit it and be able to explore that too. So a lot of times these difficult conversations, they will always be difficult, but you can find comfort in them the more you do them. And that's why the more you can be presenting in the toolbox talks, the more that you can be having productive conversations in management meetings, in supervisory meetings, presenting ideas and thoughts that you have in mediums that are available to you so that you can have the debate. Because I guarantee you, there's going to be people who watch this who disagree with me. And they get to, because they have a different experience and a different viewpoint than me, and they may have something that they can bring to the table. And there's going to be people who are nodding along who agree with me. My favorite thing to do, in theory, is to walk into a safety conference, well-attended safety conference, and in the middle of it, when they have a little Q&A period, drop the, is a seatbelt an engineering, administrative, or PPE control? And just walk away after the disaster that I've just left. Because there will be people who staunchly argue on all three sides of that. And there is an argument for all three sides of that. And I can tell you, as somebody who's been in the industry for 15 years,
that it's a PPE control.
that I don't know. Because I am somebody who does argue all three sides. I will be like, well, I can see why you would see that.
Okay, so this is an interesting point here, because you did write a book about communication, right? Mm-hmm. The Power to Speak Naked, How to Speak with Confidence, Communicate Effectively, and Win Your Audience. Mm-hmm. So when there's something that has arguments for all different sides, how do we effectively communicate in that situation?
The first thing is to recognize that no one individual is ever 100% correct. A lot of our conviction comes from exposure. A lot of our exposure comes from culture and practice. So if I believe a thing, there is a lot of reinforcement before I get to something that is a belief. Because belief is well beyond fact at that point. And when we get really ingrained in a thing, it's because we had supporting evidence from our own experiences that led up to that. But to the seatbelt, I will have people who say, well, it's an engineered device. This was created. It's a thing that stays in place and is passive. And therefore, it is engineered because if I get into an accident, that will lock and the airbag, another engineering control, will go off. It will keep me in where it is. So obviously, the seatbelt is an engineering control because it is passive in its use and it doesn't have to do it. Then you have the next person who goes, no, oh, but it's not passive. It's not passive. It is active. There's a rule around it. You have to wear the seatbelt. Otherwise, it just sits there. So you have to actively engage in it. And therefore, because there's a rule around it and because you have to actively choose to do it, that is administrative control. And then you have the next person who goes, no, but it's PPE. It's PPE because it only protects the one user and only if they use it correctly and only for the exact scenario in which it was designed. Ergo, it is a PPE control. I would argue that all three of those arguments are correct. So what is it? And then further, does it matter? And this is the bit that really, 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 really frustrates me with modern safety. The need to classify and quantify. Because what you can't measure, you can't manage. I call BS. I think it's entirely possible to manage things you can't measure. Because we wouldn't have... Do you think Napoleon was running around measuring everything on his battlefield? Or did he go on gut instinct some of the times? I bet you he had pretty good understanding of the numbers that he was facing, the numbers that he had, what he had from artillery. But there's still a gut instinct that is required for true leadership. It's an intangible and unquantifiable thing. The it factor. You watch half of these reality TV shows like The View and The Voice, or the Voice and America's Got Talent, Britain's Got Talent, right? It's an unquantifiable thing when that person gets the golden buzzer. Because it's just, we all know, we go, yes, that person has the thing. They've got it. Define it. You can't. It's intangible. And so this idea that we have to measure things, that we have to classify things, I don't care. On a field level hazard assessment, that when my worker writes down that as part of their controls for if they get in an accident when they're traveling for their sales calls 3,000 to 6,000 kilometers every week, if they classify their seatbelt as an engineering control, an administrative control, or a PE control, I don't care. What I care about is that they understand they should use it and actively do. That's all I care about. I care about the culture piece of it, not what it's called. And I think a lot of people get locked into the classification without thinking about the impact, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they call it. They need to use it.
Right. We have to, at a certain level, we have to get down back to basics.
Yes.
What is actually happening here, right? And what value does it add that we put it in one category or another category? At the end of the day, what is the actual purpose that this thing is?
And again, ultimately, that why I don't like goal zero, because we will try. You might get a year, 2, 5, 365 days since my previous, since the last incident. But at some point that clock resets. It always does. It always does. And instead of trying to stop that clock from resetting, let's count how many days since we failed catastrophically. I don't care if we fail. Did we fail safely? Because we are going to fail. I have a 10-year-old daughter right now. I am not trying to bubble wrap her. My wife disagrees with a lot of my parenting choices, and that's why we have debate over it, because she would like to bubble wrap a little bit more. But I feel the best learning opportunities are through failure. But if we fail catastrophically, we can't recover. But if we fail safely, we can. So how do we put those control measures in place? Because failure is going to happen, so that we can fail safely without catastrophe, and therefore be able to learn from that to then implement more and more and more controls, so that we can elongate the time between failing safely without catastrophe.
So how do we jump out of our window safely? Day in, day out. How do we go through the motion? How do we fundamentally go through and make sure that we are doing daily what we need to be doing in a safe environment?
By learning from our failures.
Right.
So and everybody kind of laughs at me, because when I did that, my favorite stunt was doing the 6-story high fall, and I did it into a layer of boxes. I think we had 6 or 8 deep. They're just packing boxes, the 1x1x2 packing boxes, cardboard boxes. And if anybody has a hard time picturing this, go and YouTube search like an old Fear Factor episode, and they get people to launch cars into 2 stories worth of boxes. If you can put a Camaro into cardboard boxes, you can put a 135-pound Tyler Foley into boxes. And I don't need as many as a Camaro. But prior to that, if you go back to the beginning of stunts, early film stunts, they weren't falling into boxes. They were falling into, either down pillows or cut up foam blocks. All of these things work, but they have their drawbacks and their limitations. So they would do this, and then somebody would get hurt. And then they would go, well, what can we try to do it? And it's experimentation too. You need to have a little bit of that maverick attitude to be like, okay, well, if this isn't working, can we try this? And if the experiment fails, again, how do we set it up so that we can safely do that? So instead of just doing boxes, we're going to add boxes to our existing thing. And then we can pull the existing thing away once we've tested this to know that it's working. Or maybe we do them in combination. I always preferred the box falls to like a decelerator. So a decelerator is a mechanical device, engineering control, that attaches somewhere on the body, usually to a leg or the waist, onto a harness, and you get pushed, and the reel goes out until it reaches a certain point that has been pre-calculated, and then it engages, and there's a braking mechanism to it, very similar to a decelerator that you would use for fall protection. In fact, a lot of the technology that is in a modern self-retracting lifeline and decelerator is technology that was developed long ago by stunt guys.
Right.
And so you have that thing goes, and then it locks, and you slowly slow down. I hate them because it's getting an unintended chiropractic adjustment. You're going down head first, and all of a sudden that thing grabs and your whole body goes, and the blood rushes to your head. Where if I'm doing a box fall, although gravity is 100% in control of that situation, I assure you, the second you leave, by the way, weirdest freeing feeling in the world is to be in free fall. The world slows instantaneously. And you might be in the air a second and a half, 2 seconds, depending on how far you're falling or how high you're falling. But it feels like an eternity. Like you can hear your heartbeat in your ears. Boom, 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 boom. And that is not how slow your heart is, because it's probably going. But everything slows down. But with that box, I'm in control. I know as it's coming, I can see it coming close to me. I know when I need to tuck to do my roll. The decelerator, I have no control. I have to have faith that mechanism is going to go off. Otherwise, I'm going to continue going down. So what do? We set up an airbag below it, or we have a safety zone around it, a clear area. We put in these mechanisms so that if something goes wrong here, we still have backup, and redundancy. And it's finding those redundancies within it, right? If you look at the Swiss cheese model, when this barrier stopped, but all of a sudden the holes aligned and we got through. So what's the next barrier that we could have put in place? Or do we need to remove a barrier so that we can see through the hole? And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people stop doing. They add and add and add and add. And you got to go back to some of those ones and go, should we subtract?
Right. So to make sure I'm understanding the metaphor here. So you've got your standard safety procedure, right? But it might have a gap over here. So if we add another procedure here to cover that hole, that's good. But if you have too many layers to the cake, right?
Yeah.
You might actually be missing where you've got some big gaps just because
you can't see them.
You can't
see them until catastrophic failure.
Okay.
Where if you removed some of those layers, it would become glaringly obvious, right? Because you can see through those holes a little bit quicker, a little bit faster, a little bit better. And this is where understanding human nature, understanding what the desired outcome is, what the intent of the program is. Because that's the other thing too. A lot of times we put it in because we know we need to be safe. But how and why? As weird as it is, sometimes the selfish safety programs are the better ones because they unabashedly go, because we need to protect our bottom line. Ethically, should we be protecting our people? Yes. But if we protect our bottom line, are we protecting our people? Yes. Now, is the inverse also true? Absolutely. If we protect our people, we're probably protecting our bottom line. But again, communication style, who are we talking to and what is the actual priority? And instead of mixing metaphors and mincing words, we can just be like, okay, well, you want to save money. This is how you save money. Why do we have a 15-level procedure? There's a lot of room for error in that. Can we get away with 2 or 3 or 4 or 5? Is there a modernization to this that could take away 3 of these processes and change it in for 1? Right. And as we start to explore some of those ideas, I think the safety program evolves. Safety program should always be, right? It's continual improvement and constant evolution. So we should always be looking at, well, how does this get better? And I think if you start to look at it, how can we fail safely or fail without consequence? How can we fail without catastrophe? I think it's a much more mature way of looking at our safety programs, because the first thing is accepting that you're going to fail. And nobody likes to. I don't like to. You don't like to, right? Nobody likes to. But if we accept that we're going to, it's a lot easier to do it. Now, even when I used to speak with Tony Robbins, he would talk about rapid failure. He'll fail 100 times before breakfast. But by doing these micro failures, he's able to find what does work. And being able to experiment within that bubble safely is, I think, really the true goal.
Yeah, that's, phenomenal points all around here. You mentioned speaking with Tony Robbins.
Yeah.
Quite the guy.
Yeah.
What have you found that exceptional speakers do that really separates them from great, or I should say communicators? Because this is relevant to everyone in any profession. What are some of those things that they do that really takes it to the next level?
The first one would be personalization. And personalization in a two-way scenario. So they make it personal for themselves. They'll tell a personal story. This is why I believe this. But really, really advanced communicators lay the groundwork with their personal story and then explore how that impacts you with your personal story. And what I find is where a lot of amateurs or people who can't get to that next level of communication stumble is always making it about themselves. And nobody cares. We are selfish people, right? I'm going to do things that are in my best interest. And if they align with yours, great. But if they don't, I'm not choosing yours, I'm choosing mine. And the really, really, really powerful communicators have an excellent understanding of that, in that I have my viewpoint. This is why I have my viewpoint. What is your thought on that? Because you're going to do one of two things. You're either going to agree with me or you're going to disagree. If you disagree, I need to find out why. Because I'm pretty sure if I find out why, we can find common ground within that. And if you agree with me, I can build on it. So like when I'm doing my training seminars, when I'm doing anything, if I have a 4-hour training seminar, I'm probably speaking for about an hour and a half. Everything else is going to be directed and guided by the interactions that I'm having with the people that are taking my course. And no two courses are the same. I can have the exact same syllabus every time. I can give 20 training sessions this year from the exact same course. We will technically cover the same things 20 times, but I will never deliver it the same 20 times because it's always, always, always tailored to the audience. What are your thoughts on this? What is your experience? Do you agree with this? And you find those common nodes, right? Because you're going to have the dissenter. How influential is that dissent? And you're always going to have the person who's in agreement. How influential is that? And then managing those nodes. Do I need to modify the messaging over here? And how do I amplify the messaging here? And you can only get that through the interaction. And really, 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 really good communicators. You look at Tony Robbins' thing. He does all, the big rah, rah, rah. But what is like 3/4 of his thing? His interventions, which is just literally getting an audience member to talk and him either agreeing or disagreeing and getting them to amplify the things that he already knows to be true and getting them to see something different that he knows in himself to be true, but somebody else is contrary to. And then as they do that, because he is the node, the power of influence, all the rest of that group, the 6,000, 10,000, 20,000 people in attendance, see in real time the impact of both what he said and then what they experience. And it's that experiential part of it that I think really gets lost if you're not doing it at a high level or a professional level.
So what does that look like in a safety talk?
Real simple.
Okay.
How many people have been in this toolbox talk? Today's weekly topic is road safety. We're approaching winter. It is now coming on November, and we all need to be aware of winter tires and icy road conditions. If you are not fit for duty, please ensure that you are checking into hotels and using our journey management.
This episode is powered by BIS Safety Software, one of the leading safety and compliance software applications on the market today. With their assets module, you can track equipment, assign tasks, and attach inspection forms, all from one centralized system. Schedule forms by time, mileage, or hours in use. Scan a QR code on site to access records instantly, even offline. From vehicles and tools to safety kits and sub-assets, it's never been easier to keep your inventory organized and your records up to date. See everything they have to offer at bissafety.ca.
And yet that is 90%, right? 90% of the toolbox talks that most people experience and deliver. They're awful. Or, when's the last time you lost traction in your vehicle?
Last winter.
What happened?
It was scary. I almost went in the ditch.
Why?
I wasn't paying attention.
So it wasn't necessarily the road conditions, but your own mental state. See how we just had a dialogue? That was 1,000 times more interesting than reading this. Did we discover the exact same information? 100%. And if I didn't, I already know what the messaging is. That's the great part about being the guy who's got the paper. I know what the message needs to be. So if I don't hear the thing, I ask for somebody else's opinion until I get the messaging that I need, or I reinforce it and be like, you know what? That's interesting. So mental fatigue made you not notice the weather condition if I really want to enforce the weather conditions, right? But you already said a thing that was way more interesting than what was on my piece of paper. And nobody cares that we've switched the fleet out for winter tires. But you weren't paying attention when you should have been. That's relatable. Did anybody else experience anything like that?
So you open it up.
You always open it up. One of the things that I will use, way overuse, by the way, and if anybody ever goes to any of my seminars or conferences, as soon as I let you know that this is my trick, everybody knows it, everybody sees it, and I overuse this all the time. Turn to a friend and share what you just discovered. When I was training at the ACSA, teaching principles of health and safety management, I do that at least twice, if not 3 times an hour, because it does a couple of things. It's a pattern reset and it's a pattern interrupt, because all people do is hear that. We've been talking about an hour now. All people have heard is my voice for the most part. Blah, 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 blah. They're probably tuning in every time you talk because it's change, right? Oh, this is a new thing. Our brains are instantly attuned to the change. We go, oh, now I need to pay attention again, right? So I would, and I still do in all of my things, I would say, okay, turn to somebody beside you and let them know what your biggest takeaway from the last 15 or 20 minutes was. Then I listen. What are they saying, right? And that gives me the opportunity to reinforce the messaging that I want, correct messaging that I don't. Oh, you know what's interesting? I heard these guys over here say this. Can you repeat that? Okay, now that is an interesting take, but I want to correct one misunderstanding that I'm hearing from that. And this is why. Does everybody understand why I feel that way? Why? Do you understand? We start having those, right? Everybody's engaged. Everybody's participating. Everybody feels heard and seen. That's really all human beings want, is to be heard and seen. The people who are terrified to be heard and seen still feel included. You don't have to pick on them. I hate when we mandate that we have to talk to every person in a training class. There are introverts. I'm one of them. Leave me alone. If I don't want to contribute, I'm not going to, and don't make me. It doesn't change my understanding of what's going on. Do check in, but check in differently. Don't do it in public. Do it in private. come to me in a break. Is everything landing? Do you have any questions? Is there anything that I can clarify for you? Constant interaction with them. So a simple toolbox talk, don't talk. This is the topic. Know what the topic is, lead it, and wait. People are so busy trying to fill silences. I promise you, as somebody who's been doing this for 40 years, if you don't say something, somebody will fill in that silence.
Yes, I will. And no, good case in point, right? Those are going to be, for everyone listening, really easy ways to elevate every toolbox talk. Engaging. Just think right away, as soon as you call on somebody, sit up straight, the heart beats a little bit quicker, but they're paying attention, right? They might lean in a little bit more when they're engaged in that way. Mm-hmm. And, I'm sure you've probably seen this, but the learning is probably going to continue to stick a lot further than just if you were reading straight from the page.
Well, and that's why I hate mandated safety talks. When people are like, this is the safety talk this week, and you will do it at the beginning of every meeting that is 3 or more. Why? Who is that serving? What does that do? Again, you want to talk about good safety cultures. I've worked with an engineering firm. They have a safety moment at the beginning of every meeting of 3 or more, but they elicit it. Who has, and they don't call it a safety moment, they call it a value moment. Who has a value moment to share? One of the values is safety. One of the values is communication. One of them is cooperation. They have, I think, 5 that are on a chart, and they will put it up at the beginning of the meeting so people are even cued. So you don't have to feel uncomfortable. Like, I forget what the values are. What are the values again? They're right up there at the beginning, on the beginning slide, at the welcome slide of every meeting that they do. These are our values. So what does anybody have a value moment to share? And then they shut up. I have yet in 18 months working with this engineering firm to attend one of their meetings, safety or not, where somebody doesn't pipe up with a value moment of something that they've experienced that day, that week, that month. They're always different. They're always a learning opportunity. And it doesn't become this rote systemic thing. The worst part is the inverse of that is another company that I work with who does do the mandated. They put out the bulletin at the beginning of the week. If it's more than 3, you have to talk about this thing. Well, some of these managers attend 20 meetings. Can you imagine hearing that same thing read like this too about your tires in the winter and watching for journey management read by a different person, still in the monotone, 20 times that week, 4 times a day over a 5-day work week?
So we've talked a lot about different frameworks, different ideas, a lot of great points here. When you look ahead to the next generation of safety leaders, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges, and what advice would you give them to start addressing those now?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is conflicting messaging. Again, right? Who are you learning from? Generational differences, learning styles, evolution of programs, and our understanding of safety. And in the same way that I would probably be appalled at the safety systems and programs in place when they were building the Hoover Dam or the Golden Gate Bridge. At the time, those were advanced and state-of-the-art. And it's human nature to become complacent, and that safety professionals are not immune to that. And we get stuck in our ways and we get stuck in our understandings. And every once in a while, you need to step back and reevaluate and review what you think you know. And I think that's the biggest challenge for particularly anybody who's coming up in the safety in the next 5 to 10 years, because there are so many quick advances, particularly with the advent of AI and its ability to rapidly disseminate information for you. No longer do you need to have that person who is a technical writer. You can put it into a chat and it will create a lot of this stuff. But do you understand what it said? And so a loss of institutional knowledge. We have a lot of unbelievable safety professionals who are all retiring. In fact, one of my mentors literally passed away last month. And they're getting 70, 80, 90 years old. And if they're not deceased, their memory is failing them. And if we're not taking advantage of some of that old school understanding so that you can know what the evolution is, I think a loss of institutional knowledge and combined with a lack of frontierism and experimentalism could create some significant rifts in, for lack of a better phrase, new safety versus old safety. And I think anybody who's getting into it in the next 5 or 10 years is really going to see that. Because I saw fractionalization when I got into the industry, but not to the extent that I see it now. And I don't know that it will converge. I think it will continue to diverge.
Specifically with the AI tools, I think you bring up an interesting point where there could be almost an over-reliance on these, especially when it comes to policy.
Yeah.
And do you really understand what it's saying? And is what it's saying actually correct, or does it sound correct?
Yes. Yes. And do you have the ability to, because I do use, I use at least 3 different AIs in helping create some of the policies and procedures that I do. But I also have a good fundamental understanding. So my base prompts are significantly more robust. Where I have an admin, and she is phenomenal, one of the brightest people I've ever worked with. She's 19, but she doesn't have the base knowledge to understand when a thing spits it out and it's wrong. And that's why I still have my oversight that I do. She can be provided with the prompts and she can do a lot of the stuff, and we can do some generic creation, but you still need somebody who gets it. And even still, I don't get it right all the time. So I have oversight myself. And I think having checkpoints and those mentor roles and the people that you can touch base with, do I understand this correctly? Is this a place for me to dig in my heels, or is this a learning opportunity for me to maybe see something in a different way because I have a blind spot? Because it's hard. It's a real fine line. Am I right and will continue to be right, or was I right based on previous data that has now changed?
Right. Are you updating your procedures based on the new information that you've got, right? Yeah. And when it comes to large language models, are you providing it that insight and that new data so that it has the references so it can pull that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Makes a ton of sense. I like that you bring up mentors. When you're in the safety world, how important are good mentors?
I don't care what world you're in, mentors are critical. Safety world in particular, because people's lives hang in the balance. So having good guidance and insight and mentorship is quite literally life and death. But that goes for any, high risk trade. And mine isn't a high risk trade. I have high consequence trade, right? If I make a mistake in some of my advice or my guidance, that could have real world consequences down the road. But the funny thing is mentorship is not just who you are learning from, but who you are bringing along to. I'm of the belief that we are always 3 things in our life when it comes to this mentorship role. We are a mentor, we are a peer, and we are a student. And if we aren't all 3 of those things at the same time, there is a disconnect and a break in where we are, because there are people who are at about the same level and understanding as I am in safety. And those are the people that I look to for support and help in situations. But I also have mentors who will guide me along when I'm really stuck. When the peer group, when we're not crowdsourcing a solution, I have people above me who I can go to, who I can say, what are your thoughts? What are your experience? What am I missing? What haven't I seen? What do you know from your years of experience? But now I'm 15 years in, so there is a new generation that that reach up to me. And one of the weirdest and most surreal things right now for me, my mom has just started 2 years ago working for a small company. And originally she's an accountant by trade. and HR professional. So she was the payroll and benefits administrator. But because she's the one who's always in the office and they're a very small company, she got tasked with being the health and safety rep for the company, because she's going to be the consistent, and the health and safety rep has to be from a worker level and not supervisory or managerial level. So now my mom is taking all of this safety stuff, and she's constantly reaching out to me asking, I don't understand this. And I'm having to explain these things to my mom and be the mentor and the support and the teacher for my mother, which is just phenomenal. It's wild. It's fun. But we are always one of those three things. We are, or should be anyways, because if we don't have a peer group, you can't do things. No man is an island. And so if you don't have a peer group to support you going through, it's going to be a long slog. You need that mentorship so that you have that advanced thought, that advanced knowledge, somebody who has a higher scope or perspective than you, so that they can help point out some of those blind spots to you. But you will truly never understand what you know and what you don't know until you start to teach it. And so you should be providing that information to, because for every person that you look up to and going, hey, look, they're doing it bigger, better, brighter, stronger, faster than I am, somebody is looking up to you going, I don't know how they do that. And finding that harmony and that balance, the yin and the yang, and it's not just the one side or the other side, because in a yin and yang, there's also that crossover. That's that peer group, and then your mentorship and your guidance roles are I think critical.
So seeking to have elements of all those, right? You mentioned the peer group is sort of that crossover where you're at the same level, but you can still rely on each other for support on what you're working on.
Yeah.
And, I've been thinking about this recently, but how many people have siloed knowledge in a company, right? How many people have all this experience? You just haven't asked them to share it. Mm-hmm. You just actually haven't reached out and connected with them.
Well, and the worst part is what happens when they leave.
Right.
So not only
you lose it,
did you not know that it was there, but now you can't get it back. And so having that shared understanding and having more integration as opposed to siloed is, I think, critical to any organization's success.
Your organization, Total Buy-In, you've worked with many different companies. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, what is one moment or one instance where you're most proud of the outcome that you've been able to, instigate within an organization on their safety program?
I think my favorite one was working with one of my best friend, actually my best man at my wedding, Matt. His company runs an electrical company, so a bunch of electricians. They do multi-residential and commercial industrial construction, specialize in concrete. So running conduit pours through concrete buildings as opposed to wood frame. And got a big project up north. He was going to get his oil money finally. And there had always been a family-run business. His dad had created the business. His mom worked in the business. He was in it. His sister was in it. One of his best friends, one of our good friends, was basically adopted into the family and is, kind of the heir apparent, even above Matt, to take over the company. So there was a family feel to it, but then they got their oil and gas money. And they went from a company of 12 to 15 to a company of 120 to 150 in very rapid fashion. And all of a sudden, people didn't know Eric's name. That's Matt's dad. And people couldn't even tell you what he looked like. And they weren't doing things that they should have been doing. And there was more incidents happening and people were hurting themselves and I got to come in and kind of see how that culture had eroded. And I remember having a conversation with Eric, about, what was his priority? What was, because he was so frustrated. He's like, I don't know why these guys, I don't know why they can't understand this. This is important to me. They need to go home at the end of the day. I don't want to make that call to a family member. And we had a couple of really close calls, a couple of, they're working with electricity, and they'd had one incident, a near miss with a transformer that was supposed to be de-energized by the client, was not de-energized by the client. And we weren't talking small amperage either. Like, I think it's 780 volts or something like that. It was main distribution. Like, it was big. It was a lot of juice flowing through this thing. And he was panicked. He was like, I don't understand. And I'm like, well, have you told anybody this? Because one thing for you and me to sit down and have this conversation, this is a conversation that other people need to have. They don't know your face. He's like, well, I can't be everywhere all the time. I'm like, there are options. Let's figure out ways that we can get that messaging out. Come up even to the site, just so that people at least say, oh, I know what he looks like. He was here. It'll go a long way. He wasn't opposed to it. He just didn't think that he had it, because he had, you get to that point and, well, I'm senior management and now we have management. And that's what we've hired them to do, because then they can go and do. And we have the site super, and we have these, leads and these foremen and these trades and this, and we've got the subcontractors, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, they need to hear it from you. And so he did. He came up and he talked, and we redid the orientation process to have a video from him at the beginning. And he would tell people, listen, this is just because the organization is growing. If I could have this conversation with you in person. And we had made it personal. It wasn't the toolbox talk, reading off of a teleprompter and somebody going blah, 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 blah. We did a whole bunch of takes where we got one really from the heart. And he was able to say, this is what it is. And we would play that for people. And we're like, listen, this is a family-run business. When you work for us, you are family. And as family, I don't want to have to say these things to my extended family. I am not going to be the person who comes to your girlfriend, your wife, your spouse, your partner, your sons, your daughters, your mother. I do not want to have to look your mom in the eye. I would tell people, the worst sound that I've ever heard in my entire life was at 6 years old, when an RCMP officer came to my back door and told my mother that my father was never coming home. She made this sound. It was guttural. She wailed. Like, it was loud. It both filled the entire room and sucked all the air out of it at the exact same time. And it's a sound that I will never want to hear again, ever in my life. And, it's funny, what led you to safety? Stunts was definitely a critical part, but I think losing my father at 6 years old definitely showed me the real world consequences of not having industrial practices in place. And I would tell people that, right? Personalize it. How does that impact you? Because I know even just now, just saying that, there's a feeling that comes with the sharing of that. And that's why I told Eric, I'm like, you need to be the messaging. You need to be the face. And as soon as he did that, the retention, because we had a huge turnover too. They'd never had experienced that before, where you hire a guy, train him up, 2 months later, he's off to somewhere else. And it wasn't just the working conditions. And the working conditions at that camp were bad. Like, it was a bad place to be. But there were people who stayed. And the people who stayed tended to be the people who knew the family, who had investment in it because he had invested in them. I'm like, everybody needs to feel like you're invested. Everybody needs to feel that they know that they can turn to you. Well, they can. Yeah, but they don't know that. You need to ingrain it. We need to do more of this stuff. As soon as we did that, the retention went up. Because we were retaining people more, we weren't having to train as many people, so there weren't as many opportunities for gaps in the training. We could focus on competency review a lot more because we were retaining the people, so we weren't constantly training people. So now we could retrain or check. So the competency reviews went up, the competency levels increased. When you have a more competent, more engaged workforce who have been there and have institutional knowledge, even if it's only 3 or 4 or 5 months, because a project like that is constantly evolving, but they understand, hey, when we were building this 3 months ago, this is how it went. Now there's stuff behind the wall. If you don't know what's behind the wall, you don't know what's behind the wall. Because we were able to do that, all of a sudden the TRIF rate lowered, the retention rate increased, WCB premiums eventually come down. Like, all of those things have the trickle-on effect. And the program that I put in place there, now almost 16 years later, 20 years later, wow, was incalculable, you know, and they're still using processes in place. And unfortunately, Eric is no longer with us. He passed away last year, but he has a legacy that goes on and people know about him. And his funeral was well attended by staff because and it was a universal theme. I've never felt more cared for. I've never felt like I was part of it. This isn't a job for me. This is a family. You know, that those themes spread through. And so that isn't all on me. That's obviously, and that's the other thing too. Really good safety programs are not on one person. They're not on the safety professional. Yeah, you've got a CRSP on staff. Great. Who else is championing this for you? Right? Because you need everybody. You need total buy-in. You need to have at all levels people who are invested, who understand what the ultimate goal is and who can communicate it out. And that's the one that I was really proud of, because we were able to take what was a very disparate group and make them feel like a family. And as soon as they felt like family, they looked out for each other. They cared for each other like brothers and sisters do. Yes, there were fights and squabbles, because that's what brothers and sisters do. But they knew that dad was looking out for me. Mom was looking out for me. These are my brothers and sisters in arms. We are in it together, and together we succeed. And I'm looking out for you and you're looking out for me, and we have each other's backs, and growing that culture, not safety culture within the organization, that it was still a family business despite the numbers. And to be able to maintain that, like I said, 15, 20 years later, and go back and see that they're still using processes, and with safety evolving the way that it is, they're still using processes and systems in place 20 years ago that still work. And I think that's the key. It still works for them, and they're still having success with it. And that's what I'm really proud of.
It's a powerful, powerful example there. And it really ties together pretty much everything that we've talked about here. You did mention legacy, and that's kind of where I wanted to go for my last question. Mm-hmm. What do you hope your legacy will be in safety?
Honestly, I don't care what my legacy in safety is, because people who have been influenced by me, I think it would be my hope that there was a positive interaction. I know I still have people reach out to me from classes that I've taught at the ACSA 15 years ago, who still reach out for advice. I think that's awesome that I had enough of an impact, and that they had enough trust, right? Because it's a trust thing. What I'm telling you is real and true, and that they could see the authenticity within it. But what I would really want my legacy to be, again, I don't care what it is in safety. What I want is my legacy to be my daughter, that she knows that her dad has and had integrity, that he cared about people, and that people were his focus, and that ultimately they had a richer, more fulfilled life because they weren't injured, because they were able to fail without consequence and learn from it, because of the guidance and the teachings that I put forward. And ultimately, my real impact will be how well that's imparted on her. Because safety is not just on the job. Safety is in my house. So how does my daughter grow up? And does she embody those things that I'm trying to get everybody else in this family that I'm putting together, that's extended? Do those values translate inside my own walls? So my true legacy, I will probably never know, but it will be imparted by my daughter and what she does with her children if she has them, and how that generational growth happens because of the tiny little stone that I dropped in the water. I don't get to know where the ripples are, but I hope they're positive, and I hope it's reflected through her.
I don't think there's a better answer than that. Wow. Where can people find your work, what you're up to?
Oh, that's all over the place. Just Google my name. First thing to do, Google my name. The best place that they can go is the website. If they go to totalbuyin.com, and buy-in is B-U-Y-I-N, there's no hyphen or anything. They want to throw it in. Autocorrect will try to get you to put it in. It is totalbuyin.com. They can find everything there, whatever it is that they need from a safety resource standpoint. If they need consulting, if they need auditing, if they just need a sounding board, if they need some training. We've got some really fun videos that are tied on. You can find them on YouTube, 2-minute toolbox talks, and I go and chat, so they can do Ty the Safety Guy and go find them there. But there's lots of ways to find you if they want.
Perfect. We'll include the links down below for the website and your LinkedIn. Tyler Foley, thank you so much.
Again, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.